The mansion in Bellevue Hills was unusually silent that morning, far too silent for a house with children. Then it happened, a small, fragile sound, so delicate that even the air seemed to pause, just to listen. "Daddy." Eleanor Ashford froze at the doorway, her Hermes handbag slipping from her hand and hitting the marble floor with a soft clack. She was nearly petrified, her emerald green eyes widening, locked onto the scene before her. Her twin daughters, Ruby and Pearl, children who had never spoken a word in their 5 years, were sitting on the soft wool rug. Their sparkling eyes turned toward the man kneeling before them, Caleb Winters. In his faded navy janitorial uniform, work gloves still on his hands, he had his arms open toward the girls. His voice trembled as he whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here." And then the sound came again, clearer, stronger. "Daddy," this time from the other child. In that moment, Eleanor's world seemed to crumble. She was paralyzed with disbelief. Ruby and Pearl, born paralyzed and unable to walk or speak, were now moving their lips and forming the first word of their lives. The impossible had happened. The girls were calling the janitor daddy. Eleanor's chest tightened as she stood frozen in place. Experts from Seattle Children's Medical Center had declared Ruby and Pearl would never speak. Therapists had said their brains couldn't process language. But here in her own home, her children were speaking, calling the janitor daddy. Caleb, unaware that Eleanor was standing just behind him, continued to speak to the girls softly, his voice gentle and warm. "Sweetheart, say it again." Eleanor's heart sank as she stepped back slowly, retreating from the room before anyone could notice her presence. She could hardly breathe. For 5 years, she had spent millions on therapies, treatments, and medical interventions. She had prayed silently, wept in private after her husband Andrew's sudden death. She had tried to create order and control in this house to keep the grief at bay. But now, something had shattered that control, a single word spoken by her daughters. As she walked down the hallway, she felt the house, cold and empty, almost watching her. Everything had changed. Eleanor sat in her office, staring blankly at the familiar objects around her, unable to focus on anything. Her mind kept replaying the image of her daughters reaching for Caleb, their eyes filled with a vibrancy she had never seen. When Andrew was alive, their house had been filled with laughter and music. But since his death, Eleanor had replaced that warmth with structure, rules, and order, believing that only control could prevent her from falling apart. But now, the house felt different, as if it, too, was beginning to breathe again. Caleb had arrived just 3 weeks earlier, hired by the management company to clean. Eleanor had barely spoken to him, only glimpsing him as he worked. But her daughters noticed him, and the nurses had reported that the girls seemed calmer around him. Eleanor had dismissed these observations as mere fantasies born of desperate hope. But now, she didn't know what to believe. As she stared out the window, her thoughts were filled with questions. What had Caleb done to make her daughters speak? How had he reached them when so many others had failed? The next morning, Eleanor found herself at the dining table, her cup of coffee long cold, her mind heavy with the events of the previous day. Caleb entered the room carrying a tray of towels and cleaning supplies. Eleanor's gaze met his, her voice trembling as she asked, "May I speak with you for a moment?" Caleb paused beside the table, his posture steady, his hands folded neatly. She studied him in silence, searching for something she couldn't name. Finally, she spoke, her voice cautious. "I saw what happened yesterday. I heard them speak." Caleb's expression softened, but he remained calm. "Yes, ma'am, they said daddy," he confirmed, his voice gentle. Eleanor's heart raced as she asked, "How did you make them do that?" Caleb's tone remained steady. "I didn't make them do anything. They did it on their own." He went on to explain that he had simply talked to them, read to them, and held their hands when they were scared. Maybe they felt safe enough to respond, he suggested. Eleanor struggled to accept his explanation. How could something as simple as safety have achieved what the best doctors had failed to do? Eleanor's disbelief grew, but Caleb's words lingered in her mind. "Sometimes, that's all children need, ma'am. Someone who doesn't give up on them." She had tried everything to fix her daughters, from expensive therapies to strict routines. But here was Caleb, a janitor, claiming that all they needed was safety, something she had failed to provide. That afternoon, Eleanor visited the playroom, hoping to see if Caleb's method would work again. The twins, strapped into their support chairs, were silent as always. But when Caleb entered, the change was immediate. Ruby and Pearl's faces softened as they responded to him. Caleb hummed a slow melody, and the girls' fingers twitched. Eleanor watched in awe. They can respond, Caleb said softly. They just need time, not pressure. A shift was happening inside Eleanor. She realized that perhaps the thing her daughters needed most wasn't a cure or a therapy. It was simply to be seen, and Caleb was the one who had seen them. The next day, Eleanor's mind raced as she recalled everything that had transpired. She couldn't shake the image of her daughters responding to Caleb, something she had never thought possible. When she entered the care room that afternoon, she was greeted by the familiar melody Caleb had sung earlier. She froze, recognizing it immediately. It was a lullaby Andrew had once hummed to her when she was pregnant with the twins. Eleanor's heart ached as she realized Caleb had found Andrew's old notebook containing lullabies and notes on childcare. Caleb had learned the song from it and was now singing it to her daughters. She reached for the notebook, her hands trembling as she read Andrew's handwriting. One passage in particular stopped her heart. If anything ever happens to me, remind the girls that love can still reach them even when words can't. The truth began to sink in. Caleb hadn't just healed her children physically. He had healed something broken inside the family. Eleanor finally understood that love, not money or medicine, was the greatest healer. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Caleb," even though she knew he couldn't hear her. The house felt different now, lighter, as though it had exhaled. And Eleanor knew that her life had changed forever. This was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new part. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.